Good morning, everybody. How are we doing? It's wonderful when the children get an opportunity to come in and be a part of worship with us. Amen. They even let me march in the processional with them this service. You might not have caught it, but I'm shorter than a lot of them, so it's get lost in the shuffle sometimes. But that was gracious of them to let me be involved. It is great when they're able to join us in those ways and be a part of what's happening in here. We should all go back there sometime, right? I'll talk to them about it. Before I get going into the sermon here, I have one quick housekeeping announcement. So you've been hearing a lot about Impact Palmyra over the last couple weeks. This is a service event that we're doing as a church, and you can get more information in the bulletin. As part of that event, we are hosting a meal here. So a number of different churches are hosting community meals that week at different places. We are hosting the meal on Friday, May 3rd, so there's a link in your bulletin. If you would like to make some food for that or whatever, you can go there and you can sign up to do that. Specifically, I was told to mention by the organizers of that dinner that last year during Impact Palmyra, somebody made minestrone soup that was like life-changing, and they could not remember who it was. So if you are that person, if you are... This is like in the romantic comedy when the guy like pulls all the strings to get on the radio, just like find the girl that he forgot to get her number. If you are the minestrone soup person, please, it's just like that, right? Please make yourself known and bless us with that soup again. Sign up to have it or reach out to me and we'll get connected. I was instructed that was the most imperative thing to mention this morning. And then, preach or something. It's great to be with you. We've been working through this series, Jesus Christ, where we're talking about these I am sayings that crop up a lot in the Gospel of John, and we are coming to the end of that series this morning, to the last I am saying, which is in John chapter 15. So if you grab one of the Bibles that are near you in the pews, it's page 876. If you're using a Bible on your phone, you brought your own, whatever. John is the fourth book in the New Testament. We're going to be in chapter 15, starting right at verse number 1. Jesus is with his disciples. There's an extended monologue in the back half of John for a couple chapters where he just spends some time pouring into these disciples, like the night before, or the night before. He's going to be crucified. He's speaking to them. That's kind of the context of what's going on. He is preparing them for what's about to happen. So we read in John 15, and you can follow along in your Bibles and on the screen. Jesus says to them, "I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit so they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing." We'll stop there for a moment, but you can just keep that open for the entirety of the sermon. We're going to kind of be camped out there a little bit. So there's a lot going on in the Gospel of John. We often, it's kind of like Jesus talks a lot in it. It's sweet, it's nice in some certain ways, but when you really try to dig into the meat of what he's saying, it can be really difficult. He's stacking ideas on top of each other at a rapid pace. There's a lot in this passage, and I'm not going to be able to talk about a lot of it, verses 1 to 17 here. I would really encourage you guys over the coming week, the next couple days, to read this passage again for yourself and see what God might speak to you. But I'm going to try to pull out one specific aspect of this passage this morning, and I'm actually going to start with one particular word in this passage. It's a word that it's easy to overlook. It's easy to jump right past it as you're reading. It's right there at the beginning. Jesus says, "I am the true grapevine." And as I was working on this sermon, that word caught my attention, true. Like, why does he say that? So Jesus has all these I am sayings. I am the light of the world. I am the way, the truth, and life. I am the resurrection and life. I am the bread of life, etc., right? And sometimes, he's setting up a comparison. He's saying, like, you've heard about the manna from heaven, but I am the bread of life. I'm the real manna from heaven. But he never adds that little true. And so that sparked my interest. I said, well, okay, why does he add that? What's the false grapevine? What kind of comparison is Jesus trying to set up here? Because it's not immediately clear to us, I would say. It wasn't clear to me. So I went back and I looked at the Old Testament and looked at when does when does vine come up in the Old Testament? When does vineyard come up in the Old Testament? What could that tell us? So we're going to do a quick little vineyard tour through the Old Testament. Sounds fun? People like, well, you at least like vineyard tours. Maybe not the Old Testament, but I'll take what I can get here. We're going to start with Psalm 80, and this will all be up on the screen, so just follow along in there. Don't try it. If you want to, you can follow along in your own Bible. But Psalm 80, we have the first instance, if we're going left to right in our Bibles, of the vine symbol coming up. So this is a song written, a plea to God on behalf of his people to restore them in the wake of oppression from their adversaries. And verse 7 reads, "Restore us, O God of hosts. Let your face shine that we may be saved. You brought a vine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it. It took deep root and filled the land." So in this verse, we find the first of many instances in the Old Testament in which the kingdom of ancient Israel is referred to as a vine or a vineyard. Every time that image is brought up, this is kind of what it refers to. It also happens several times throughout the book of the prophets. So Hosea chapter 10, we read, "Israel is a luxuriant vine that yields its fruit." Luxurious wasn't fancy enough. We got to go luxuriant. In Jeremiah 2, "Yet I, God, planted you a choice vine, wholly of pure seed." Breaking out the 80s slang there. Choice. Isaiah 5, "My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill." That begins this kind of really beautiful poem where God is imagined as this vineyard owner. And this occurs twice in the book of Ezekiel as well, where the prophets, they take this vine metaphor and they develop it to speak of God's chosen people, the Israelites. They are a vine. They're taken from Egypt, rescued from slavery. They're planted in the promised land, intended to bear fruit. Fruit generally being kind of a metaphor for, good works, acts of justice and righteousness, right worship, right conduct. When God plants this vine, these are people that are attached to his name, and they bear fruit befitting of God's beloved, sacred, special, chosen people. Unfortunately, every time that the prophets introduce this vineyard metaphor, without exception, it turns out to be a bad thing. So I didn't share all of the passages. So if we go to Hosea 10, we start off, yes, Israel is a luxuriant vine that yields its fruit. And the more his fruit increased, the more altars he built to other gods. Their heart is false, now they must bear their guilt. The Lord will break down their altars and destroy their pillars. The more fruitful and prosperous they were, the more their hearts turned to worshiping other things. Jeremiah, "Yet I planted you a choice vine, wholly of pure seed. How then have you turned degenerate and become a wild vine? Though you wash yourself with lye and use much soap, the stain of your guilt is still before me." Here again, the choice vine turns to worshiping other gods. In their comfort, in their settledness, they abandon their original calling. Isaiah says, "My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and he cleared it of stones. He planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it, hewed out a wine vat in it, and he looked for it to yield grapes." He did everything he could to set up this vine for success. He said, "You are my vine. It's going to be awesome. You're going to bear all this fruit. It's going to be a wonderful thing. I'm going to make a wall. I'm going to water it. I'm going to irrigate it. I'm going to plant it. I'm going to do everything." But it yielded wild grapes. It yielded some other fruit. And you can read on in that passage and see what else God, through Isaiah, says concerning that vineyard. And you can read in Matthew 21, where Jesus tells a parable about a vineyard owner that has some similar resonances. In every instance, God's chosen people, his beloved, when they are planted in the promised land, they abandon him. They abandon his ways. They run after other gods. They run after every shiny new thing that catches their eye. Every single time the vine is mentioned. So it's in that context that Jesus comes forward and says, "I am the true vine." It's in the light of the record of Israel's failure that he says, "I am the true vine." And I think with all that in mind, we can feel the weight of his words a little more. I am the true vine. Where every other man and woman had previously failed, Jesus says, "I will succeed." Where every other person would fall short, would slip into idolatry, into selfishness, he will meet the standard. He will fulfill the mission. He will check off every box. He will stay devoted. He is the true vine. He is the faithful Israelite who keeps the covenant. He is the one truly good human who bears good fruit. And he is not God's plan B when we fail. It was always going to be Jesus who fulfills the mission of God, fulfills the mission of Israel, carries it forward, does by his power what we couldn't by ours. And he says here in John 15:5, those who remain in me, the true vine, and I in them, will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Nothing. That's a strong word. Jesus says apart from him, apart from being connected to him, we aren't capable of bearing any fruit, doing anything. Now, I think there should probably be a little asterisk on that, right? Jesus doesn't mean that you can't tie your shoes without him. You don't necessarily need Jesus to tell you that the bunny goes over the creek and around the log and through the hole and whatever, however you teach your kids to tie your shoes. You don't need Jesus to help you scramble your eggs. You do need Jesus to make them over easy, get that flip. But, so let's put that asterisk quick on the word nothing. It doesn't mean nothing. I think what Jesus is talking about, the type of fruit that Jesus is talking about, is things with eternal value. The things that God has called us to do. The things that God has made humans for. The things that really matter in the end. And I don't think I need to over-explain that because I think most of us probably have a sense of what I mean when I say the things that really matter in the end. We kind of get that. Or at least we have a strong sense that our life lacks that kind of fruit. That those things that really matter aren't there in the way they should be. Jesus says if you want to bear that fruit, if you want to produce things that have eternal significance, if you want to be as you were created to be, you must remain in him. You must abide in him. You must be rooted in him and his love. Otherwise, you can't do anything really valuable. And to be honest with you, I kind of don't believe Jesus on this. Can I say that? Can the pastor say that? I'm not sure I believe him. Certainly, I know the Bible. I know John 15:5. I could recite this for you. I could write it down on the test. I could tell you that, and at some level, I believe it. But if I took an actual, sober look at my life, if you took even a casual passing look at my life, I think you'd find someone who actually believes that he can do a whole heck of a lot apart from Jesus. There's a large part of me that believes I can. At least I spend a lot of time trying to see what kind of fruit I can bear on my own without him. And I feel pretty good about my record. I feel like I've done some good things, and I'm suspicious of Jesus' words here a little bit, if I'm honest with you. I mean, when I examine the story of Israel, when I read about this vine that's planted and settled and in its comfort turns away from God and says, let's see what I can accomplish on my own. When I read Genesis 3 and Adam and Eve hear about this fruit, and the serpent says, you will be like God. And they think, oh, wow, let's do it. Let's see what we can get done here on our own. That resonates with me in a major way. Why? Why does that resonate with me? I mean, I know better, right? I know Jesus' words. I'm the one up here preaching the sermon. I recognize the truth in this to some level, so why don't I live differently? Why do I continue to see what kind of fruit I can bear on my own? Why do I do that? Why do I work myself to the bone? Why do I burn out? Where are my ambitions actually rooted? For me, the quickest answer that comes to mind is pride. I desperately want to bear fruit. I want to build a life of meaning and purpose and significance. I want all these things that I'm doing and trying hard to do. I want them to matter in the end. And I want all of that to reflect well on me. I'm primarily concerned with what can I accomplish? What can I do for people to think well of me? And let me tell you, that is a scary thing to see in yourself when you're a pastor. That's a dangerous thing to recognize yourself when you're up here on a stage, under the lights, looking down on y'all. The only time I get to look down on people. It's wonderful. I'm just like this all the time. It's dangerous. But that's where my heart's at a lot of the time. Is anybody else there? Is anybody else oh, there was a lot of going on this morning. Consumed. How's this going to reflect well on me? Maybe for some of us it's rooted less in pride and more in insecurity. Where's our worth coming from? Do we want to bear fruit of our own to prove that we are worthy? To prove that we should be loved? To prove that that person should love us? Why don't they love us? And we work our whole lives to prove something about ourselves. That we could be something in the eyes of someone else. Does this resonate? I know a lot of you, and I know you work really hard, a lot of you. That's Central PA, right? Just work hard, just get your nose to the ground and just nose to the ground. Is that a saying? We struggle, we push, we strive. Why? Why? Why are we doing it? Is it pride? Is it insecurity? Is it some other sin that's revealing itself in this need to just work so hard all the time? To hear a word of approval from someone in our lives? Why do we need to always improve our homes? Down to the last, why do we need to improve our wardrobes, our vehicles? What are we building for? What are we acquiring for? What are we trying to prove? Why are we trying so hard to build fruit of our own? What's it all for? Or better, who is it all for? I was sitting here in church a couple weeks ago during worship, stressed about everything, because, obviously the weight of the world rests solely on my shoulders, right? You know that. I'm pretty important. And so it gets hard, it gets heavy sometimes to be carrying all that around. And I was in worship, and we're singing a song, and I heard what I've come to understand to be the Holy Spirit speaking to me. And this doesn't happen in audible words necessarily, but it happens for me in what I would call foreign thoughts. Things that pop into my head that I don't recognize as being from me, that are unrelated to what was happening before. We're singing about whatever. I'm just standing in awe of Brock's voice, and then suddenly I hear this sentence pop into my head. Who are you trying to prove? Was the sentence. And I thought, first of all, Holy Spirit, you got to work on your grammar a little bit. That doesn't quite make sense. It's not, the saying is not who are you trying to prove, it's what are you trying to prove? And that, that weird grammar stuck in my head, got stuck in my craw a little bit, and I turned that over in my head a lot. Who are you trying to prove? Who am I trying to prove? Why are you concerned with all these different things? And why, coincidentally, do all these different things you're concerned about have to do with, reflect on you? You don't worry about other people's stuff. You trust God with that, but when it comes to my stuff, who am I trying to draw attention to bring glory to? At the end of my life, when we stack up all my accomplishments, what will those things communicate to others? That I was a good guy, I had my stuff together, did a lot for others? Am I trying to prove Ryan to others? It's natural to want to do that. To some degree, it's good to do those things, but it's natural because of our pride, because of our insecurity, for any number of reasons. It's really natural to work hard to prove ourselves, and we all do it in different areas and in different ways. But if Jesus is to be believed, there's a problem with that. If Jesus is to be believed, then going down that road of proving yourself will lead to us drying up. I think the grapevine imagery is really helpful here. Imagine you came up to a grapevine of ripened grapes and you cut off a branch. And we'll say it's a big branch. And this branch has a lot of really, full, ripe, luscious grapes on it. And one by one, you take them and you do whatever it is you want to do with grapes. I don't know, turn them into raisins or stomp them into grape juice. Not wine, we're in church. Come on, people. Welch's 100%. Whatever it is you do with these grapes. And you could make some things happen. You could do some good things with these grapes. These are really good grapes. But eventually, very quickly, actually, the grapes are going to run out. And then that grape vine, that branch by itself is going to wither. It's going to dry out. It's going to die. And do you know what that branch is then good for? Ezekiel 15 describes this vividly. The Lord says to the prophet Ezekiel, "How does the wood of the vine surpass any wood? The vine branch that is among the trees of the forest, is wood taken from it to make anything? Do people take a peg from it to hang any vessel on it? Behold, it is given to the fire for fuel," and it's barely useful for that. I mean, it's kindling at best. If you've seen dead vines at any point, they're just kind of wispy and thin, and they burn up in a second. They're not really good for anything once they're done bearing grapes. Unless, you get on Pinterest and you want to make this cute decorative wreath for Christmas time. But for the sake of my argument, let's ignore that and get it off the screen and say that dead grapevines are not good for anything, with one minor exception. Whatever fruit they're able to bear will eventually and pretty quickly be used up. And then there will be nothing left to offer. As Jesus says, anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. The end result of trying to do everything by our own power, by trying to prove ourselves, prove what we can do alone, what kind of fruit we can bear alone, the end result of that is not pretty. Some of you have been there. Some of you are headed there. Some of you are there right now. Some of you, a lot of us, know well the feeling of withering. Feeling used up. Feeling like you've poured out energy and blood and sweat and tears for weeks and months and years. And the end result of all that is a little disappointing. We know that feeling. And today, God's message to us is that we were made for so much more than that. Obviously, we were made to abide in Jesus, to trust and know that He is the vine rooted in the soil. He is the faithful one. He is the source of life. He is the truly good human, the one faithful Israelite. He is the one who gets it done, the one that we need to stay connected to, because the alternative is not pretty. The alternative is to be severed from that vine and to wither and die. Because the only real worthwhile fruit, the only way to bearing this fruit of eternal significance, these things that really matter in the end, is to bear fruit that glorifies Jesus, that points to Jesus, not to us. The life we are called to live, this rich, abundant, fruitful life of following Jesus, involves being rooted in Him, remaining in Him, bringing Him glory, of recognizing this really, really, really important truth of the Christian faith. It's not about you. Some of you are pretty great. It's not about you. Paige, get over yourself. See you Monday. This truth can be a hit to our pride at first. We don't want to hear that. There's a big part of us that don't want to hear that and say, obviously you're wrong, God, it's a lot about me. But no, it's not about you. And if you can get that truth past that pride, I think you'll find it's like the most liberating thing. It is the most freeing thing because it slots us right where we were made to be. Rooted in Him, deriving our worth, deriving, whatever it is we're producing, whatever it is we're creating with our lives, it doesn't really matter anymore in light of who He is. It's not about you. I encourage you to just embrace that. That is freeing. It's freeing for me after seasons, after months of banging my head against the wall to bear something and looking at the pitiful raisins that I produce. 3 raisins. That's a really important lesson for us. It's not about us. And that's okay. That's good. We're a branch. We're made to bear fruit, made to be people who love God, love others, who follow Jesus, and in every aspect of our lives give glory to him, not ourselves. He is who we are out to prove. And only through him will these things that really matter in the end come. So how do we do that? How do we remain in him? How do we abide in Jesus? Well, there's hundreds of possible answers to that question. We're going to do 2 of them today. There's one way in which this passage in which Jesus tells us, and there's other ways in the Gospels that he shows us. First, in verse 10 of chapter 15, he says, "When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love." And a few verses later, he clarifies, saying, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." So, we remain in Jesus. We abide in Jesus when we love one another. And this is not the love from the Notebook. Keep reading. Verse 13, he clarifies the love that he means. This love is defined as laying down your life for your friends. So Jesus says, do you want to know what it means to abide in me, to bear my fruit, to be one with me? It means to be relentless in putting others before yourself. Your spouse, your kids, your teachers, your students, your parents, your pastors, whoever it is, lay down your life for others. That last one was a joke, by the way. This is the perfect antidote for this withering self-concern that we experience. Is to train yourself to be faced outward, to love others, to lay down your life for others. And laying down your life is not, it's not always literally laying down your life and sacrificing it. It could be laying down your priorities, laying down your prerogatives, putting yourself second, not insisting on your own way, as 1 Corinthians 13 puts it. When we do that, we forget about ourselves entirely, and that's a really good place to be. So first, Jesus tells us how to remain in him. We remain in him when we love one another. Second, in a lot of different places in the Gospels, he shows us. And if we look at Luke chapter 5, near the beginning of his ministry, after helping a leper, we read, "But now, even more, the report about Jesus went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray." And I want you to consider one thing about this morning. When he was going off into desolate places and to pray, what was he leaving? He was leaving a crowd of people that still needed to be healed, a crowd of people that still needed to hear the gospel, to see Jesus revealed to them. He left that. So presumably there were people that Jesus could have healed but didn't in his lifetime. Apparently there were people Jesus could have preached the gospel to in his lifetime and didn't. And that's a hard thing to wrap our minds around. It's a hard thing to why didn't you make more of that 3 years that you had, Jesus? I could have made a lot more of it, trust me. There's that pride. But Jesus knows better. Apparently it was more important for him to be in prayer, to commune with his Father, than to heal that one more person. Throughout the book of John, all the time Jesus talks about this, about being one with the Father. I only do what I see the Father doing, what he tells me to do. We are one in purpose. And part of that is that Jesus constantly is going away to just commune and just to be with the Father. So if we're to follow Jesus' example, if it wasn't so important for the God of the universe that he had to heal every single person, but that if he, being who he was, could go off and pray, then how much more us? If we're to follow his example, we remain in Jesus when we do less and pray more. And if there was ever an apt mantra for Americans in 2019, I wish I had bumper stickers for you guys. It just said, do less. That's another way we abide in Jesus. Just do less. You have nothing to prove, and you don't have as much to offer as you think you do. I'm sorry. And you certainly don't have to prove anything to God. You don't have to prove, you don't have to earn his love. There's nothing you can do or could do or should do that's going to move the needle for him in terms of what he thinks about you. So just relax. Do less. Pray more. And prayer could be a number of different things. Prayer could be simply being with him, listening, meditating, reminding yourself of who he is and who you are, and being freed by that. Prayer could also mean appealing to him, taking these cares and concerns and putting them in his hands, asking him to do something about it, because he does, and he will. And he is the vine. He is the one that can actually do things. So when we pray, we are turning things over to him where they should be. He is the one who makes our lives what they're meant to be, makes us who we're meant to be. So if you are a follower of Jesus this morning, there's no need to rely on your own power anymore. As someone who's done that a lot, you're just going to embarrass yourself in the end, trust me. We don't need to do that. We are loved. We are so infinitely loved. So examine the areas in your life where you are trying to prove yourself to the world, to your family, to your friends, whoever it is, rather than prove Jesus, rather than point away from yourself into Jesus. Examine those areas in your life this week. And I pray that God would prune us in those areas, that he would cut away the distractions, he would refocus us. And that's an easy prayer to pray because God answers that prayer. God's already doing that. In a couple places in the New Testament, he promises to discipline and prune those that he loves, and that is an act of love. So when you feel that, remember that. If you are not a follower of Jesus, I would bet that you're familiar with this sensation of withering. I would bet that you're familiar with this feeling that you have nothing else to give, that you're spent, that all your effort and your blood and your sweat and your tears, at the end of the day, it doesn't amount to very much, and it just leaves you frustrated, feeling bad about yourself, just empty. I would bet all of us are familiar with that feeling. But especially if you're not a follower of Jesus this morning, he has so much more for you. So much more. He invites you into something so much better, into a life rooted in him, where you can let go of your self-concern. You can let go of whatever it is you feel like you have to prove and just rest in who he is and know that that is enough. That's all he asks. If you are not a follower of Jesus this morning, I just hope that you hear and know that God has gone 100 and you got to go 0. You just got to open your arms. Receive what he has for you. Receive who he is. Believe who he is. Just take him at his word. We all need to do that. We all need to recognize it's not about us, and that's good. It's not about what we can do. It's not about what we can't do. The gospel is this free gift from God, and we all need to have it preached at us every day. He invites us to come and be who we were made to be connected to him. And when we do that, we find who we really are in him. It's awesome and it's liberating, and I don't go there enough. But I pray that y'all would join me as I get up another day and keep trying. Knowing that he's Jesus. I mean, that's this series. He is who he is, and that's who we celebrate, that's who we're rooted in, and we unapologetically say that is who matters. Not us. Not the things we can or can't do. Pray that the Spirit would speak to all of us as we need to hear him today. Would you pray with me? God, I praise you for who you are. I praise you for your Son, who we celebrate today and every day. It's It's amazing after years, after decades of following you, that this gift of grace can still feel so fresh, so surprising. And I pray the people in this room would feel that. I pray especially for those that are not followers of Jesus, that they would recognize that you're standing right there with them, that your presence would overpower and overflow in their lives, and that they would take that simple step of just opening their arms and receiving, letting go of their need to prove themselves, letting go of whatever it is that's pinning us down. Jesus, free us in your name and for your glory.